Hey there. Tonight, we're traveling back to medieval Europe, in a time when justice wasn't about fairness or innocence, but about power, fear, and strict obedience. This is a world where the smallest mistake, the wrong word, or simply crossing the wrong person could cost you not just your arm, but your life. No trial by jury, no appeals, just harsh laws and brutal punishments designed to keep the social order in place. So, before you get cozy under that warm blanket, go ahead and like this video and subscribe to the channel, but only if what I do here genuinely helps you wind down at night. And hey, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it right now? There's something oddly soothing about knowing there are others awake with us, wandering through history together. Now, dim the lights. Light a candle if you've got one, or just let your screen's soft glow pull you deeper. Close your eyes, and slowly let the noise of today fade away as you step through a world where the list of crimes that lead to death is long, murky, and terrifying. You've just woken up in the year 1325. Your bed is a half-rotted straw mattress stuffed with bugs and hay that smells like a barn floor because it was a barn floor 3 months ago. There's no memory foam, no pillows, and definitely no Egyptian cotton sheets. Just a wool blanket that hasn't been washed since last winter and now weighs roughly as much as a small cow from the accumulated grime. You blink awake as the church bell clangs in the distance. It's the medieval version of an alarm clock, only louder and somehow even less merciful. Your home is a wooden hut with one room, no windows, and a charming open-concept floor plan where your family, livestock, and domestic insects all share the same space. The smell? Oh, it's a fragrant symphony. A subtle blend of stale beer, human sweat, goat, and something you pray isn't mold, but know in your soul probably is. Scented candles haven't been invented, and even if they were, they'd just melt on your dirt floor. You try to stretch, but immediately regret it, because the air is freezing and your joints ache. You're 22 years old, which in medieval terms is roughly middle-aged. Your spine creaks like an old wooden door, and your knees sound like a bag of rocks being shaken by a confused peasant. Getting out of bed is a gamble. The floor is either wet from last night's rain, which leaks through the thatched roof, or crusty from something your neighbor's chicken did. Either way, your bare feet are now part of the ecosystem. Oh, and privacy? What's that? Your entire family, and maybe a random cousin who just never left, are waking up beside you. There's no bedroom, no curtains, no me time, just communal everything. Welcome to morning in medieval Europe, where you're never truly alone. Because parasites, rodents, and 8 other people are always with you. And this is just how your day starts. It only gets worse from here. You've managed to crawl out of your medieval haystack of horrors. Congrats. Now nature calls. And it's not calling politely, it's screaming. Here's the part where you start missing the modern bathroom. There's no toilet, no seat, no toilet paper, no flush, not even a mildly resentful plunger in the corner. In the 14th century, relieving yourself is an adventure, a social experiment, and often a small public event. If you're a peasant, your bathroom is likely a wooden bucket behind the house, which is already full because Uncle Wolfstan had a rough night after eating bad turnips. The smell is biblical. You hold your breath, do your business, and then, here's the kicker, toss it into the street. Yes, the street. You're supposed to shout something like, "Gardyloo," before dumping it out the window. That's Old French for "watch out below," although frankly, no one ever moves fast enough. Streets in medieval towns are open sewers, a charming river of human waste, animal droppings, and mystery liquids you'd rather not examine. If you're lucky enough to live in a town with public latrines, congratulations. You get to sit shoulder to shoulder with strangers in an outhouse where privacy is a myth and ventilation is a cruel joke. You might make small talk, but try not to breathe too deeply. Toilet paper? Never heard of it. Most people wipe with straw, leaves, rags, moss, or, if they're feeling especially indulgent, a scrap of wool. Sometimes nothing at all, which might explain why handshakes weren't popular yet. And if you're in a castle, surely it's better, right? Well, sort of. You might have a garderobe, a hole in the wall that drops your waist directly into the moat. Great idea, except that your enemies know this. And yes, attackers sometimes climbed in through the waste chute. Talk about entering through the back door. So whether you're a farmer or a baron, medieval toileting is a humiliation ritual. It's cold, it's public, it's dangerous, and it's never not disgusting. One slip on a wet stone path, and you're face first in humanity's leftovers. And you still haven't brushed your teeth, but we'll get to that next. You survived the toilet. You deserve a reward, right? Maybe a nice breakfast. Something warm, delicious, comforting. Sorry, this is medieval Europe. Nothing is comforting here. Breakfast, if you can call it that, is a grim affair. There are no eggs, Benedict, no coffee machines sputtering awake, and certainly no avocado toast. You sit down, or squat, near the fire to a wooden bowl of something that looks like it was scraped off a muddy boot. Welcome to your daily ration of pottage. Pottage is a thick, gloopy stew made of whatever you can find. Grains, root vegetables, maybe a few beans if you're lucky. It's been simmering in the same pot for days, sometimes weeks, and new ingredients are just added on top. The flavor profile? Earthy, with hints of despair. You eat quickly, not because it's delicious, but because you're starving. Your family hasn't eaten in 2 days. The harvest was poor. The stores are empty, and the local lord's taxes have left you with nothing. Your children are crying from hunger, and your spouse looks at you with hollow eyes. So, you make a decision. You'll go to the market and steal a loaf of bread. Just one. Just enough to keep your family alive. You slip into the bustling market, heart pounding. You spot a vendor distracted by a customer and seize the moment. Your hand darts out, grabs a small loaf, and you tuck it under your cloak. You turn to leave, but a shout stops you in your tracks. "Thief!" The crowd parts as the vendor points directly at you. 2 guards rush forward, seizing you by the arms. The loaf falls to the ground, trampled underfoot. You're dragged through the streets, jeered at by onlookers. Children throw stones. Adults spit in your direction. You're taken to the town square, where a makeshift court awaits. The judge listens to the accusation, glances at you, and declares the sentence. For theft, the punishment is the removal of the offending hand. You plead, you beg, you explain your desperation, but it falls on deaf ears. The law is the law. Your hand is placed on a wooden block. A large man, with a grim expression, raises a heavy axe. The crowd watches in silence. The axe falls. Pain unlike anything you've ever known floods your senses. Blood pours from the stump where your hand once was. You're left in the square, bleeding and broken as the crowd disperses. You manage to stumble home, where your family weeps at the sight of you. You've paid the price for a loaf of bread, but the hunger remains. In medieval Europe, justice is swift, brutal, and unforgiving. Stealing to survive isn't just a crime, it's a death sentence in slow motion. So, next time you bite into a warm slice of bread, remember, in the Middle Ages, that simple act could cost you everything. Now, you've just made the bold decision to poach one of the king's deer. The good news? You're about to enjoy a hearty meal. The bad news? That meal might be your last. Because in medieval England, killing a deer in the royal forest wasn't just theft, it was treason. And treason, as you might guess, had a rather final consequence: death. You see, the forests weren't just woodlands. They were the king's personal game reserves. The deer within them were considered the king's property, protected by a complex and severe set of laws known as forest law. These laws were so strict that even accidentally harming a deer could land you in serious trouble. But intentionally hunting one, that was a direct challenge to royal authority. Now, you might think, it's just a deer. Surely the punishment can't be that severe. But medieval justice had a flair for the dramatic. Punishments for poaching ranged from hefty fines to mutilation, and yes, even execution. There are accounts of poachers being blinded, castrated, or even sewn into a deerskin and hunted by dogs. A gruesome parody of the very act they committed. Enforcement of these laws was carried out by foresters, officials tasked with patrolling the royal forests. They had the authority to arrest anyone suspected of poaching, and their word often held significant weight in court. If you were caught with a dead deer, a bloody knife, or even just a hunting dog, that could be enough to convict you. Trials for poaching were swift and unforgiving. The evidence didn't need to be overwhelming. Suspicion alone could seal your fate. And once convicted, there was little hope for mercy. After all, you hadn't just stolen food, you had defied the king himself. So, as you sit down to enjoy your illicit venison, take a moment to savor it. Because in the eyes of medieval law, your feast is both your crime and your last supper. You've just been summoned to the Lord's hall, not for a feast or a favor. No, it's something far less pleasant. The nobleman, your lord, the man who owns your life like it's a piece of land, has sent out the call. A war is coming, a border skirmish, a petty feud, or some distant crusade nobody really understands. But what matters is this: you are expected to pick up a weapon and fight. No ifs, no buts, no polite refusals. You think about saying no. You think about ignoring the call, hiding in your filthy hut, pretending you never heard the horn. You think, maybe this war isn't yours to fight. Maybe your aching back and cracked hands shouldn't be wielding sword or spear. Maybe you just want to live another day without a blade in your ribs or arrows raining down like cursed hail. But in medieval Europe, the idea of saying no to your lord, that's not just unwise, it's criminal. And justice will be as swift as a hawk and as brutal as a blacksmith's hammer. The crime? Refusing to fight for your lord. It sounds simple, but it's laced with all kinds of medieval venom: cowardice, rebellion, treason, disrespect. To the Lord, your refusal isn't just laziness, it's a direct challenge to his authority and the order of the world. Your disobedience is a threat to the entire feudal system, where everyone knows their place and obeys their superiors without question. So what happens next? You're rounded up. Maybe by the Lord's men, maybe by the local reeve, the Lord's enforcer with a club and no patience. They drag you before the Lord's court, a crude wooden platform with half-rotted benches where peasants, serfs, and small folk await their fate. Your heart pounds like a drum. The Lord sits on his high-backed chair, cloaked in furs, gold, and a look that says he's never lifted a finger to fight, but demands your blood nonetheless. The Lord speaks. His voice is cold, sharp like a blade sliding from its sheath. You refuse to bear arms in my defense. You turn your back on your duty. Such cowardice is rebellion, punishable by death or worse. You might try to explain. Maybe you have a wife, children, a sick mother. Maybe you're too old or too weak. Maybe you're terrified. But none of it matters. Your words fall on deaf ears. Medieval justice is swift and symbolic. It's meant to terrify, humiliate, and send a message to anyone who thinks of defying their betters. The sentence? Public and cruel. First, they strip you of your weapons. No sword, no axe, no shield. Then comes the branding, a hot iron pressed into your cheek or forehead, leaving a permanent mark. It's a sign for all to see. Traitor, coward, rebel. The brand burns your flesh, smoke rising in a sickly swirl, the stench of burnt skin filling the air. You scream, but no one cares. Pain is a lesson. If the Lord is feeling merciful, which is rare, you might be sentenced to serve in a penal military unit, a death sentence disguised as service, because these units are sent on the most dangerous missions, the ones no sane soldier would volunteer for. Wave after wave of arrows, shield walls shattered, battles where the odds are stacked against you like a rotten deck. But more often than not, the punishment is death, and not a quick death. Execution is theatrical, designed to terrify. They might hang you in the village square, leaving your body swinging for days as a grim warning. Or worse, they might break your limbs first, shatter your bones with an iron cudgel until you beg for mercy, then slit your throat while you're still conscious. Justice is a performance, meant to reinforce the social order and crush defiance, like a bug. And the symbolism doesn't end there. After your execution, your body might be mutilated and displayed in the woods or by the roadside, so anyone who thinks of refusing the Lord's call sees what happens to traitors. Your name becomes a curse. Your family's honor is stained forever, and your children might suffer for your crime. But it's not just about punishment. Refusing to fight threatens the entire feudal contract. Your Lord protects you with his soldiers, his courts, his laws. In exchange, you serve him, bear his burdens, and yes, fight his wars. When you break that chain, you threaten chaos. The peasants need to know. Loyalty isn't optional. Disobedience means death. Imagine what that means for you, standing there in front of the Lord in his grim assembly, knowing you're about to become a cautionary tale. Your future is no longer yours. It belongs to the spectacle of justice, the politics of power, and the cruelty of medieval survival. Maybe you think it's unfair. It is. But the medieval world isn't a place for fairness. It's a place for power, obedience, and fear. The laws are harsh the punishment's merciless, and the stakes, life or death. And if you somehow survive the initial judgment, the stigma will follow you. You'll be a marked man, a pariah. Neighbors will avoid you. The local priest might refuse you communion. Your chances of marriage, trade, or even basic respect will vanish like morning mist, all because you refused to pick up a sword. Welcome to medieval justice. Refuse the call to arms, and you're not just refusing a fight. You're refusing the entire order of your world. And that refusal? It's a crime with a price far worse than death, a legacy of shame, pain, and erasure. You've just committed a crime in medieval Europe by walking away. You're a serf, which is basically a human barnacle glued to a patch of land that belongs to someone else. You can't vote, you can't leave, and you definitely can't dream of freedom. But you did. You packed your things, probably just a crust of bread and a wooden spoon, and slipped away under cover of darkness. You're now a fugitive, not from justice, but from feudalism. In the eyes of the law, you're not a person with hopes and dreams. You're property, like a cow, but with slightly better conversational skills. Your lord owns your labor, your time, and your very existence. Running away isn't just frowned upon. It's a direct challenge to the social order. And the social order has a very specific response: punishment. If you're caught, the consequences are severe. You could be chained to prevent future escapes, as some lords did to assert their authority. In some regions, the punishment was even more brutal. In the Vaud, a canton of Switzerland, lords were allowed to chastise their serfs moderately, which could include imprisonment or seizure of possessions. In Notre Dame, it was legal to take a serf's life if they got into an argument with the tenants. But let's say you manage to evade capture. You find your way to a town, hoping for anonymity and a fresh start. There's a saying, town air makes free. In some places, if a serf could live in a town for a year and a day, without being claimed by their lord, they could gain their freedom. But that's a big if. Lords had the right to pursue and reclaim their runaway serfs, and many did. Some even sold the rights to their fugitive serfs to others, who would then hunt them down for profit. The legal system wasn't on your side. Serfs had limited rights and were often at the mercy of their lords. Even if you managed to plead your case in a court, the odds were stacked against you. The law was designed to maintain the status quo, not to provide justice for the lower classes. So, you keep moving, always looking over your shoulder. You take on odd jobs, avoid questions, and hope that one day you'll be free. But the reality is harsh. You're an outlaw, not because you stole or killed, but because you dared to seek a life beyond servitude. In medieval Europe, freedom was a luxury reserved for the few. For the rest, even the act of dreaming about it was a dangerous endeavor. So, as you lay low in a stranger's barn, listening for the sound of approaching footsteps, remember, in the eyes of the law, you're not a runaway. You're stolen property, trying to steal itself. And in this world, that's a crime punishable by whatever your lord deems appropriate. You've just committed treason with an axe, not because you murdered someone with it, although that would also get you killed, but because you dared to swing it at the wrong tree. And not just any wrong tree, a royal one, in the king's forest, where trees aren't trees. They're sacred, sovereign, and apparently more important than you. Let's back up. You were cold. Freezing, actually. Your family was huddled in the corner like wet rats, wrapped in the same lice-infested blanket you used to dry the ox's hooves last week. The fire had gone out. Again. You needed wood. Not a luxury. A necessity. You weren't trying to stage a coup. You just wanted to not die of hypothermia. So you crept out before dawn, past the sleeping dogs, the nosy neighbor with 3 teeth and the hearing of a hawk, and into the forest. The wrong forest. Because here's the thing they forget to mention in peasant school. If you're allowed to learn anything at all besides, "Yes, my lord," almost all the good forests are royal forests. And royal forest doesn't mean a fairy tale woodland with bluebirds and violin music. It means off limits. It means everything in it. Trees, deer, rocks, possibly even the dirt, is the property of the king. You, however, are not. You're just an inconvenient organism breathing valuable oxygen near His Majesty's trees. Now, were there signs? Number. Of course not. Literacy is for monks and people who don't have to eat bark stew in bad years. But ignorance is not a defense. That's the medieval way. You didn't know? Too bad. Neither did the last guy. They hanged him anyway. You probably thought, "I'll just take a few branches. Dead wood. No one will miss it." And for a moment, it feels victorious. You even whistle. You feel useful, strong, providing. You are the medieval version of a DIY king. Until you hear the hooves. It's the forester. And he's not here for small talk. The king's forester is not a friendly park ranger in khaki shorts and a wide smile. He's a weaponized tax collector on horseback, trained to spot poachers, wood thieves, and other oxygen-wasting serfs like yourself. He's got a horn, a sword, and a permanent sneer. And lucky you, he spotted you mid-swing, just as your axe bites into something that looks suspiciously alive. "You there!" You freeze. Your brain tries to climb out your ears. You consider bolting. But the trees are thick, your boots are wet, and the horse is bigger, faster, and not out of breath. Within moments, you're on the ground, face in the moss, your arms twisted behind your back like a poorly made pretzel. Your axe is confiscated. Your dignity evaporates. You try to explain. "My fire went out. I didn't know this was royal land. It was just a few branches." But that's the problem. The fewer the branches, the more symbolic the crime. Because this isn't just about wood. It's about order. You are a peasant. You take what you're given. And if what you're given is starvation and frostbite, well, tough turnips. Taking what hasn't been permitted, even something as stupid as a twig, means you're questioning the hierarchy, the divinely ordained structure of things. And that, in the medieval mind, is dangerous. So you're hauled off, not to a warm cell with 3 square meals and a stern lecture. Number, you're tied to a post in the village square. People you've known your whole life, neighbors, friends, that girl who once smiled at you while you shared a beat, now stare like you're a monster with 2 heads and a squirrel tail. Children laugh. Elders shake their heads. One of them spits. The local reeve shows up. He's not smiling either. He's got a scroll, a seal, and a voice like a tax ledger. He reads the charge aloud. Illegal harvesting of royal timber. Then he lists the possible punishments, just to really brighten your day. A fine of 10 shillings, which is roughly 300 years of your savings. A public whipping, in case shame wasn't painful enough. Shackles in the pillory. Bring your own cabbage to Dodge. Or, if the mood is right and the moon is high, death. Death. For firewood. And don't think you'll get a trial. This isn't Law and Order, Feudal Victims Unit. It's more like Law and Torture. Your fate depends entirely on how irritated the local lord is, whether his dog barked too much last night, and if his cook burned the venison. If he's feeling merciful, you'll be fined more money than your grandchildren will ever see, and banned from entering the forest again. If he's having a bad week, that tree will be the last thing you ever touched. And God forbid you actually cut down a tree. That's not just theft. That's an arboricide. Yes, they made up a word for murdering trees, especially royal ones. And the punishment for arboricide? Public hanging. After a quick stop at the stocks, naturally. You don't want to skip the part where townspeople get to pelt you with rotten vegetables and moral superiority. Oh, and by the way, if your family uses that wood you chopped before you were caught, they can be punished too. Accessory to timber treason. Doesn't matter if they were freezing. Doesn't matter if your baby hasn't stopped crying in 4 nights because her lips are blue and her fingers don't move. The law is clear. The trees are sacred. You are not. And if you think you can lie your way out of it, think again. They'll summon witnesses. That nosy neighbor, suddenly very talkative. That girl who smiled at you, now shaking her head in disappointment. And if no one saw you, doesn't matter. The forester did, and his word is gospel. So what now? Best case, you lose your axe, your savings, and a few layers of skin from the lash. Worst case, you swing at a tree, and then you swing from the gallows. You tried to warm your family. Now you've just warmed the noose. And remember, next time you hear a branch snap in the woods, run. Not because of wolves, but because the real predator wears a crown. Now, you open your mouth just once, just to say, purely hypothetically, mind you, that maybe, just maybe, the church doesn't know everything. Maybe St. Lawrence didn't actually grill to death on a holy barbecue while cracking dad jokes. Maybe the relic in your chapel, that's supposed to be Mary Magdalene's finger, looks suspiciously like it came off a turnip. You think you're being clever. You're not. Because now old Marta, who hasn't had 10 teeth since King Philip died, narrows her eyes at you from across the market and mutters, "Heretic." And in medieval Europe, that word travels faster than fleas on a corpse cart. The punishment for theft is a fine. The punishment for lying is stocks. The punishment for heresy? Fire. Actual fire. With you inside it. You try to backpedal. You say it was a joke, a misunderstanding. You blame the mead. But you said it in public, in earshot. In a world where words are dangerous and truth is defined by men with crosses, your attempt at casual blasphemy just lit your funeral pyre. It starts slow. The village priest, Father Aldrich, who smells like onions and holy water gone stale, calls you in for a friendly chat. He speaks softly, but his eyes are sharp, like he's already picturing how the smoke will rise when you burn. "So," he says, tapping his fingers together like he's counting sins. You doubt the church? You laugh, nervously. Big mistake. Heretics always laugh. It makes it easier for everyone to believe you're possessed. Or worse, educated. By the next morning, someone's painted a cross on your door in pig's blood. Kids whisper behind their hands. Even your mother avoids eye contact, which is hard in a one-room hut where she still sleeps 5 feet away from you and the goat. You go to the tavern to clear your head. That's where the whispers get louder. He says the Pope isn't God's voice. Says priests are greedy. Says saints don't perform miracles. You said none of that, but it doesn't matter. Rumors in a medieval village evolve faster than smallpox. By sunset, someone's convinced you're in league with Satan himself and that you light candles with your eyes. A day later, the bishop's men arrive. They don't knock. They never knock. They barge into your hut with righteous indignation and a scroll bearing some very serious Latin. You can't read Latin, but you recognize one word. Hereticus. That's you now. They tie your hands with rough rope that bites into your wrists like it's hungry. You're paraded through town, barefoot, stumbling, with villagers gawking like they've never seen a sinner up close. Spoiler, they have. They're just glad it's not them this week. Someone throws a cabbage. It's not even fresh. You're brought to the church court, a dim, smoky room with heavy wooden chairs and men who think smiles are sinful. The inquisitor wears black, always black. No name, just a voice, like a wet coffin lid, being pried open. You stand accused of speaking heresy. He intones. You open your mouth to defend yourself. He slams a hand down. Speak only when asked. Right, of course. The trial is swift. Your confession is coaxed out of you with a mix of theological trick questions and a not-so-subtle display of the tools of persuasion. Iron tongs, thumb screws, a brazier that someone keeps adding coals to, very slowly, for dramatic effect. You sweat, not just from fear, from the heat. They always put the accused close to the fire. Gets you in the right mindset. Do you renounce your false beliefs? They ask. Yes, you squeak. Do you accept the Holy Church as the only path to salvation? Yes. Do you confess that your tongue, led astray by Satan, endangered your soul and the souls of others? Yes. They nod, then smile. You think, briefly, you've been spared. Nope. Confessing just means they burn you with love, because you knew better and still strayed. You're not just a heretic. You're a lapsed believer. That's worse. That's like knowing not to eat raw pork and still licking the swine. You're held in a cell overnight, chained to a wall so damp it weeps. You don't sleep. Who could? You listen to the rats fight over breadcrumbs and wonder if you'll scream or go silent when they light the pyre. The next morning, they drag you out to the square. There's a crowd. It's market day. That's not an accident. Burnings draw a crowd like bear baiting or free soup. You see children, old women, even the blacksmith who once lent you a hammer, looking at you like you're a cautionary tale wrapped in kindling. You're tied to the stake. Real wood, dry, stacked knee-high with just enough air gaps to keep the flames dancing. Someone sprinkles holy water on your head. It drips down into your eyes. It burns, and not because it's holy, because it's boiling hot. A priest steps forward and asks if you have final words. You think of saying something profound, a truth to pierce the ages. Instead, all you manage is, I just said, maybe the relic was a turnip. The crowd murmurs. Someone actually laughs. The executioner, hooded and silent, lights the torch. It touches the straw. Flames crawl up the wood like they've been waiting their whole life for this moment. The heat hits you. You scream. Of course you do. Everyone screams. Even saints scream when they burn. Martyrdom isn't clean. It's loud and it stinks. You die slowly. The church says your soul is cleansed in fire. You're not so sure, but you don't get to argue anymore. And when your ashes cool, they scoop them into a box labeled "Case Closed." But the village remembers. Not your jokes, not your fears. Just that you opened your mouth and got turned into smoke. So the next time someone thinks, maybe the church isn't always right, they keep it to themselves. You've just committed heresy, not by torching a cathedral, not by summoning demons in a graveyard. No, you just opened your mouth at the wrong time, in the wrong place, in front of the wrong people, and let slip a thought you should have swallowed like spoiled broth. It started at the alehouse. Of course it did. Alehouses are medieval Twitter. Cheap drink, louder opinions, and zero moderation. You were 3 cups deep, maybe 4. Talking theology like a proper idiot with Brother Thad, the half-drunk monk who used to copy scripture until he developed a tremor and a gambling problem. Everyone was laughing, passing bread, tearing meat with greasy hands. And then someone brought up Mary, the Virgin Mary. And you, dear God, you said something like, well, maybe it wasn't exactly a virgin birth. Maybe Joseph just... You don't even finish the sentence. You never get to. The table goes quiet. The air freezes. And suddenly, you're not among friends. You're among witnesses. Because here's the thing about words in the 14th century. They don't belong to you. They belong to God. And God, famously, has a legal team that makes no allowances for jokes, hypotheticals, or I was just drunk. You try to laugh it off. Say it was sarcasm. Say you meant something else. Say Brother Thad misheard you. He nods nervously. But it doesn't matter. Because Marin, the innkeeper's niece, heard you too. And she's been looking for a way to get back at you, ever since you called her soup bland. Now she's talking loudly about how someone denied the miracle and blasphemed the holy womb. You wonder if those exact words ever came out of your mouth. But that's irrelevant now. Truth is malleable. Heresy is not. 2 days later, the priest knocks on your door, not for a blessing, not for tithes. For you, you're taken to the church court, not a normal court. This one comes with incense and chanting, and men who haven't smiled since Christ was in sandals. The inquisitor, yes, an actual inquisitor, sits behind a wooden table that looks suspiciously like a chopping block. He's wearing robes so black they make your sins feel brighter. And he's got one job: to save your soul, preferably through pain. You're not allowed a lawyer. Lawyers are for nobles or the French. You're not allowed to see the exact charges either, but you know them. Denying the Immaculate Conception, spreading doubt, speaking words that, if repeated, could unravel the very fabric of Christendom, apparently. You're asked to confess, not just to the words, but to the thought. Did you, in your heart, doubt the virgin birth? It's a trap. If you say yes, you've admitted heresy. If you say no, you're lying. And lying to the church is also a sin. You try something in between. I don't remember what I said, Father. I had been drinking. He frowns. Satan speaks loudest when the mind is fogged. You're asked again and again for hours until you begin to doubt yourself. Maybe you did deny it. Maybe you are guilty. Maybe you're the devil's mouthpiece and didn't even know it. This is the beauty of medieval justice. The longer you talk, the worse you sound. Eventually, someone brings in the instruments, not for music, for clarity. There's the rack, classic, effective. There's the thumb screws, smaller, more portable. There's the strappado, a crowd favorite. Your arms tied behind your back, and you're lifted by a rope until your shoulders pop like overcooked joints. Not to kill, just to encourage honesty. They call it the questioning, not torture. Just firm encouragement in the name of the Lord. Your hands are trembling. You confess to everything, to doubts, to thoughts, to dreams you never had but figure they want to hear about. You even throw in a few extra sins just in case. Gluttony, gambling, secretly eating cheese during Lent. You name names. Brother Thad, Marin, the guy who once sneezed during Mass and didn't say sorry. Now you're guilty. Fully, publicly, religiously guilty. You're thrown into a cell beneath the monastery. It smells like fear and mildew and something worse that's long since died. You have one rat for company, and he's starting to look judgmental. They give you bread, moldy, water, brackish, and a crucifix on the wall, just in case you'd like to stare at the man whose mother you insulted. Your punishment arrives 3 weeks later. They've spared you the stake. For now. Thanks to your humble repentance and a donation your cousin scraped together by selling his only cow, you get public penance instead, which is medieval code for humiliation. They strip you down to your undershirt, chain your hands, hang a sign around your neck that reads, "I spoke blasphemy against the Virgin," and then they parade you through town like a sin-flavored carnival attraction. Children throw dung. Adults spit. One woman throws an onion. You're not sure if it's symbolic or just what she had. Either way, it stings. The priest follows, reciting prayers loud enough to drown out the laughter. Someone plays a flute badly. You're not sure if it's meant to be part of the punishment, but it definitely feels like it. You're marched to the church steps, forced to kneel, and then, in front of everyone, family, neighbors, livestock, you beg the Virgin Mary for forgiveness, loudly, clearly, with tears if you can manage them. The priest nods approvingly. You're forgiven now. Technically, but nothing is forgotten in a medieval village. You're now that person, the doubter, the blasphemer, the reason it rained too much last week, the one who probably cursed the mayor's goat. You can try to go back to normal life, but the stares follow, the whispers grow, and next time, if there is a next time, you may not get penance. You may get fire. Now, you're reading a not-so-particularly good book, mind you. It's not thrilling. It's not poetic. It doesn't have saints, martyrs, or moral lessons about why coveting your neighbor's ox is a sin. It's just strange, odd letters, unfamiliar words, smells like spices and mildew. And now that it's in your hands, your life expectancy has dropped to about the length of an average monk's sermon, which, depending on the monk, could be anywhere from 10 minutes to eternity. You found it tucked behind a loose stone in the abbey wall while cleaning out rat droppings. It was wrapped in waxcloth, hidden so deliberately that, of course, you had to open it. Curiosity didn't kill the cat. That's a modern lie. Curiosity got peasants flayed alive and their heads nailed to gates. First, the obvious problem: the book isn't in Latin. That's a red flag the size of the Holy Roman Empire. All religious texts, all official records, all proper books are written in Latin. Latin is the sacred language. Latin is holy. Latin is safe. This question mark, this book isn't safe. It's written in something else. Letters that curl and loop and smudge across the pages like they're trying to hide themselves from the Inquisition. And maybe they should. You flip through it like a fool. No gloves, no care. Just raw peasant fingerprints all over a potential death sentence. You think maybe it's Arabic, or Greek, or worse, Hebrew. You don't know, because you never learned to read. But the letters look like they belong to people your priest warns about. People who don't eat pork. People who bathe too often. People who definitely don't go to Mass. Then you start reading it aloud. Silently, of course, because you're not that suicidal. But your lips move, just slightly, whispering strange syllables that dance in your mouth like foreign prayers. You don't understand it, but somehow that makes it worse. Forbidden knowledge tastes more dangerous when it's sweet and incomprehensible. You know what happens to people who own strange books? The village remembers Brother Eustace. He had a scroll in Greek once, claimed it was a treatise on medicine, said it could cure fevers. 2 days later, he was locked in a crate and set on fire in the village square. The bishop said the flames purified his soul. You watched the whole thing while chewing a turnip and trying not to cry. But this book didn't belong to a monk. This wasn't found in the scriptorium. It was hidden on purpose. Someone wanted this book to disappear, and now it's in your hands. You slam it shut. Too late. Someone saw you. You don't know who. Maybe it was the one-eyed apprentice who always smells like goat and betrayal. Maybe it was the boy who cleans the chamber pots and has an uncanny ability to be in the wrong place at exactly the right time. Whoever it was, they'll talk. They always talk. You try hiding it again. Back behind the wall, behind the stone, behind the droppings and despair. But now you know it's there. That's the curse of forbidden knowledge. Once it touches your thoughts, it burrows in like a flea in a wool tunic. And no matter how hard you scratch, it itches. You try to forget. You try to pray. You try not to think about the words, the shape of them, the possibility that maybe, just maybe, the book isn't evil. That maybe it's just old. Forgotten? Misunderstood. But you live in a world where misunderstanding is fatal. Where doubt is heresy. Where books are more dangerous than blades if they're not written by the right kind of dead man. A week passes. Nothing happens. Then the priest calls you by name. Not your full name, just the one he uses when he's disappointed, which is always He asks you about your work, about your chores, about what you've seen in the abbey walls. He smiles, but it's the kind of smile that makes you want to confess things you haven't even done yet. You lie. You say you've seen nothing. You say you know nothing. You say the only book you've ever touched is the Bible, and only then with clean hands and holy intent. He nods, says you're a good soul, a humble worker. Then he walks away, not out of kindness, but like someone who knows where you sleep. You don't sleep that night. By morning, the book is gone, stone pried open, cavity emptied. Only a smear of wax cloth and the lingering smell of mildew remains. You're not sure what's worse, the fear that they'll find it with your fingerprints on it, or the fear that they already have. A day later, the bishop arrives. Not a coincidence. Bishops don't do anything by accident. His arrival is swift, unannounced, and followed by the kind of silence that only precedes punishment. Then they start the questions. Not formal, not public. Just soft ones, asked over bread or while hauling water. Have you seen anything odd in the abbey lately? Did anyone give you a strange book? Do you know what heresy looks like? You nod. You smile. You shake your head when appropriate. You throw in a few God bless yous for good measure. But your heart beats like a condemned man's drum roll. 3 days later, the firewood pile in the square doubles. They haven't named you yet, but they will. Someone always talks. Someone always trades your life for a lighter sentence or a coin or a whispered blessing. And when they do, you won't get a trial. You won't get to explain. They won't care that you didn't write the book, that you didn't even read it properly, that you didn't mean to question the world. Because meaning doesn't matter in the Middle Ages. Only appearances do. And you look guilty. They'll call it heresy, maybe witchcraft, maybe sedition. The title changes, but the result is the same. Your punishment? Public, brutal, spectacular. Your death will be a warning, not just to the village, not just to other peasants who can't read, but to the idea that knowledge might live where it's not allowed. You could flee, maybe, if you had money, or shoes, or a map. You don't. All you have is your guilt and a gut full of dread. And somewhere, tucked under the bishop's robes or locked in the monastery's vaults, is a strange little book that never meant to kill anyone. But it will. Starting with you. You've just survived another bad harvest. The fields that were supposed to feed your village, your town, your entire region have betrayed you. The wheat is shriveled. The barley is patchy. The potatoes? Well, those won't show up for another century or so. But in your world, it's the same story every year. The crops fail, people go hungry, and someone has to pay. Guess who? You. Yes, you. The Jewish resident of this God-forsaken place. Because when the fields turn brown and the granaries sit empty, superstition spreads faster than the rats in the streets. Someone must be responsible for this catastrophe. And, spoiler alert, it's not the weather or poor farming. No, it's the people who don't look, talk, or worship like the rest of the village. It's you. You wake up to the sound of shouting. No gentle alarm bells here. The angry mob is gathering outside your home, their faces twisted in fear and hatred, torches blazing in their hands like miniature suns, ready to burn everything in sight. The harvest has failed, and in their panic, the local Christians have decided it's time for a scapegoat. You try to reason, but reason doesn't stand a chance here. Someone accuses you of poisoning the wells. Because why else would the water taste funny? Another claims you've cursed the fields with dark magic, working for the devil himself. They don't care that you've tended your small garden all year, or that you've shared what little you have with neighbors when the drought hit. Facts mean nothing. Fear means everything. And so the violence begins. You hear the first screams before you see the stones flying through your windows. One strikes your wife's hand, drawing blood. A child wails as the mob crashes through the door. The man who lives down the lane, always suspicious of outsiders, is now the loudest voice calling for your destruction. You try to escape, but the narrow alleys are swarming with men wielding pitchforks, clubs, and axes. There's no judge here, no fair trial, just raw, brutal justice handed down by angry fists and quick blades. You remember the laws. Technically, being Jewish isn't a crime. The king's edicts protect you, at least on paper. But in practice, being a non-Christian in this time and place is practically a death sentence. The local lord may turn a blind eye, or worse, quietly nod in approval. His tax collectors still come, but his soldiers, they're nowhere to be found when your house burns. The mob drags you from your home, shoves you into the village square, and there's a crowd of hundreds now, faces pressed close, hungry for blood. They accuse you of witchcraft, heresy, poisoning, and worse. Some claim you've sacrificed Christian children in secret rituals, a rumor older than the last bad harvest, but no less deadly. You plead innocence. You shout that you worship the same God as them, that your prayers are just as honest, that you are just as human. But your words fall on deaf ears. The preacher, standing on the steps of the church, waves his hands and calls for purification by fire. The crowd cheers. The local constable steps forward. You had hoped for mercy, a chance to explain, but his sword gleams in the sunlight, and his voice is cold. By order of the Lord, you are to be seized for crimes against the realm and blasphemy against God. You shall be tried by fire or water, and if found guilty, your punishment will be death. You know the trial is a sham. You'll be thrown into a pit with burning wood or bound and dunked into the freezing river. The choice isn't yours. It's a farce designed to end your life with a semblance of justice. Before the trial can start, a group of boys, no older than 10, throw stones at you. One hits your cheek, cutting the skin. Their mothers shout, urging them on. You wonder if these children know what hatred is, or if they were simply born into it. Your neighbors, the ones you helped during last winter's famine, avoid your eyes. Some even cross the street to pretend they don't see you. Fear has turned friendship into betrayal. As you're dragged to the stake, you catch a glimpse of your home, now aflame. Your possessions, your sacred books, your memories, all burning in a fire started by those you once called neighbors. The executioner ties your hands. The smell of smoke fills your lungs. You hear the chanting. Prayers not for you, but against you. You look around one last time and see faces filled with hatred, fear, and a twisted sense of justice. You realize something. In this world, survival is not about innocence. It's about belonging. And if you don't belong, you're a target. The flames lick your feet. The heat rises. You scream, but no one hears. Because in medieval Europe, when the crops fail, it's not just the soil that's barren. It's the humanity. You survive. Somehow, you escape the fire, the pitchforks, the screams. But you're changed. The scars on your skin are nothing compared to the scars on your soul. From now on, you move in shadows. You keep your head down. You avoid the marketplace on market day. You don't ask for help, because every glance is suspicion, every whisper a threat. The town's leaders quietly decide that the Jewish problem must be contained. You're forced to live behind walls, ghettos, cramped and dirty. The very place that once protected your culture becomes a prison. Guards patrol the streets, ensuring no one corrupts the Christian population. The lines between protection and persecution blur. Your children grow up afraid to speak their language, afraid to wear their symbols, afraid to be themselves. At school, if they attend at all, they learn that they are lesser, cursed, dangerous. Some families decide to flee. They pack what little they own and head for other towns or other countries, hoping for mercy, safety, or simply a place where the crops might grow and the people might be kinder. Many never make it, robbed, starved, or killed along the way. And those who stay? They live every day with the knowledge that the moment the next bad harvest hits, the mob will return. Only then, it won't be rumors or accusations. It'll be death. You try to hold on to your faith, your traditions, your identity, but it feels like the world itself is set against you. Because in this time, being Jewish isn't just about religion. It's a crime in practice, a mark of guilt, a reason for violence. And the worst part? No one will admit it's a crime. You've just woken up in the early medieval period, and your child is sick. Not the sniffles or a minor cold. No, this is the kind of illness that turns cheeks pale, breath shallow, and prayers desperate. Medicine as you know it? Forget it. The doctor is usually the local wise woman, a healer, a midwife, or maybe a self-taught herbalist who knows the forest better than the king's physicians. You've heard the stories. Healing potions brewed from roots, barks, and secret recipes passed down in whispers. You're out of options. So when a woman in the woods, a stranger with wild hair, a faded cloak, and eyes that seem to flicker with a strange fire, offers you a potion, it feels like your last hope. You take it. You pray it works. Word spreads faster than wildfire in your village, especially when that wild-haired woman disappears back into the forest like a ghost. Whispers start, quiet at first. Did you see that strange woman? She carries herbs that could cure or curse. They say she talks to spirits. And then louder, sharper. Witch, sorceress, bewitcher of children. Soon, your name is tangled with hers, a poisonous vine twisting around your family's reputation. You wanted to save your child. Instead, you've painted a target on your back. In early medieval Europe, fear of witchcraft wasn't just superstition. It was a deadly, very real force. The church condemned it. The law condemned it. And the villagers? Well, they were the jury, the executioner, and sometimes the judge. There was no trial in the way you might imagine one. No innocent until proven guilty. If you were accused, you were already guilty. The evidence was in the fear itself. The mere act of consulting a woman rumored to practice witchcraft could mean death. Your intentions? Irrelevant. The mob doesn't care that you wanted to help your child. They care about the danger you supposedly invited. You try to keep your head down, but the paranoia infects every corner of the village. Eyes follow you wherever you go. Children who once played by your door now cross the street to avoid you. Neighbors murmur behind cupped hands. When someone's child falls ill, and they do, often, fingers point at you. Why? Because witches bring sickness as easily as they bring cures. The line between healer and harm-doer is razor thin. One moment you're desperate for a cure, the next, you're the disease itself. Then the night comes. The moon barely peeks through a cold, heavy sky as a crowd gathers outside your door. Torches flicker, casting monstrous shadows against the crumbling stone and timber walls of your home. The village priest stands at the front, clutching a worn cross, his voice booming with fiery condemnation. "This is the work of the devil," he shouts. "Those who consort with witches are traitors to God and man alike." The crowd roars in agreement, a dark sea of rage and fear. You plead, you explain, you swear your innocence. But words are useless here. The laws, both sacred and secular, have no room for mercy when it comes to witchcraft. The church's hand is heavy, wielding fear like a sword. To be accused is to be condemned, because witchcraft is seen as a pact with evil itself. The penalty? Death by fire, hanging, drowning. Whichever method serves to terrify the living and cleanse the community of sin. They don't wait for the full moon or a proper trial. Justice in the early medieval world is swift, brutal, and public. The accused are paraded through the streets, faces bloodied or pale with terror. The mob surrounds you, hungry for vengeance, eager to see the devil's work undone by death. Even your closest friends may turn their backs, afraid of sharing your fate. Because associating with a witch was like wearing a brand that marked you as cursed, forever tainted. If you're lucky, they give you a chance to confess, hoping that a forced admission will satisfy the court of public opinion and perhaps grant you a less agonizing death. But confessing means damnation, in life and after, a soul burned in hell for eternity. If you deny it, the torture begins, not necessarily by the church, but by the local enforcers. Pain is a tool of truth, or so they say. Your screams echo through the night, lost under the shouts of the crowd and the crackle of flames. Maybe you're thrown into a pit of water, a trial by ordeal. They bind your hands and feet and dunk you beneath the surface, waiting to see if the devil will claim you. If you float, you're guilty, because only evil rejects the cleansing embrace of water. If you sink, you're innocent, but drowning in the process. No matter what happens, your fate is sealed. The court of superstition has spoken. The irony is cruel. The same potion you accepted to save your child's life is now the evidence that ends it. The same desperate hope that drove you to the witch's door is twisted into proof of your evil. And your neighbors? They smile politely at church on Sunday, but carry burning torches on Tuesday. They believe in protection from disease, from the devil, from witches. But in their eyes, you are all three. This wasn't just an isolated horror of the early medieval era. It was a system, Fear fed on ignorance, and ignorance fed on fear. Power lay with those who controlled the narrative, the clergy, the local lords, and the fearful masses desperate to protect themselves. And innocent people like you, caught in the middle, sacrificed for the supposed safety of the community. So next time you hear about witches and their dark magic, remember this. Sometimes it was a sick child, a desperate parent, and a potion from a stranger that doomed an innocent to a fiery death. Not because they were evil, but because in that world, fear was the only law that mattered. And if you somehow survive the accusation, the name calling, the burning stairs, know this: your life will never be the same. You'll carry the stain forever, your family's name whispered with suspicion for generations. Because in the early medieval world, consulting a witch for help wasn't just a risk, it was a sentence. You've just managed to survive the day in medieval Europe. For once, your limbs haven't been broken, your house hasn't burned down, and your meals didn't taste like despair. But no, that good luck can't last forever. Today, your fate is tangled up with a dog, a snarling, slobbering, probably flea-ridden dog. Not just any dog, mind you. This one belongs to a noble. And in the medieval world, that changes everything. You see, noble dogs aren't like the scrappy mutts roaming the village, stealing your chickens or nibbling on the scraps you can't afford to lose. No, noble dogs are prized beasts, bred for hunting, protection, and to remind the peasants who owns the land. These dogs are fat, pampered, and covered in shiny collars that cost more than your entire year's rent. And if one of those dogs turns on you, snarling, baring teeth like it wants to turn you into minced meat, you'd better believe you're going to defend yourself. So there you are, a simple villager, just trying to get through the day, when this noble's hound lunges at you. You shove, you kick, maybe you grab a stick, and before you know it, the beast is dead. Maybe a fatal bite to the throat, or a cracked skull from your well-aimed cudgel. Either way, the dog is down and out. At this point, you might think, well, I was defending myself. Surely the law will understand. Ha! Welcome to medieval justice, where your word doesn't matter as much as a hound's reputation. The noble finds out, of course. Word travels fast, especially when it's about the death of something valuable. A royal hound dead in the hands of a commoner? That's not just bad news. That's a personal affront, an insult, a crime that calls for blood. Your trial begins before you can even catch your breath. No judges, no lawyers, no impartial juries. Justice in the medieval period is more like a game of who has the bigger sword or the thicker purse. And guess what? You've got neither. The noble's word carries weight. My dog was attacked without cause, they declare, their voice dripping with the kind of righteous fury only a person used to getting their way can muster. This man has killed my loyal companion. Let him be punished. Your protestations about self-defense fall on deaf ears. Medieval courts don't care much for nuance when it comes to noble property. The dog wasn't just an animal. It was a symbol of power, a piece of the noble's honor, and killing it was the same as stabbing the Lord himself in the back. The punishment? Oh, it's not pretty. You might face a hefty fine that could bankrupt you and your family for generations. Or worse, a brutal public flogging to humiliate you before your entire village. If the noble is feeling particularly vindictive, you might be thrown in the stocks, or even face imprisonment. Death? It's possible, especially if the dog was considered valuable enough or the noble powerful enough to demand it. And here's the kicker. Your side of the story? Forgotten. Irrelevant. Medieval law doesn't lean towards fairness for peasants. It leans towards preserving the status quo. The lord's property must be protected, and peasants are expendable. You might think, well, I'll just keep my head down and avoid noble dogs in the future. Easier said than done. These hounds patrol the lord's lands like furry little judges, sniffing out trouble and reminding you who's in charge. Accidentally crossing a noble's hunting party is enough to get you bit, or worse. Plus, nobles love to show off. A hunting dog is a status symbol, and nobles don't tolerate peasants who get in the way of their prestigious hobbies. If your life isn't precious to the Lord, neither is your livelihood. And if you're unlucky enough to be caught near one of these prized dogs when it meets its end, well, you're in for a world of hurt. You could try to flee, run off to another village, change your name, hide in the woods. But medieval Europe isn't exactly a big place. News travels on the lips of traveling merchants, gossiping neighbors, and, of course, angry nobles. Your face might end up on a wanted poster, or worse, a blood price placed on your head. Or, if you're braver, or more foolish, you could try to appeal to the church or a local magistrate. But that rarely helps. The church often sided with nobles to keep peace and maintain their own privileges. Magistrates were appointed by lords, not elected by peasants. Your plea for justice is more likely to result in a stern warning or a demand for compensation than anything resembling fairness. So what have we learned here? Killing a noble's dog, even in self-defense, isn't just a bad day. It's a social death sentence. A reminder that in medieval society, animals could be worth more than human lives, depending on whose hands they walked on. And that snarling beast that nearly took your arm, not just a dog, a symbol, a living badge of power. Take it down, and you're not just fighting an animal, you're fighting the whole feudal system. And that's a fight no peasant ever wins. But hey, at least you survived to see another sunrise, right? Just try to stay clear of the hunting grounds tomorrow. Because in this world, a noble's dog isn't just a pet, it's a weapon. And accidentally becoming the dog's executioner? Well, that's a crime with consequences that last long after the last bite fades. You've just made the worst decision in your entire miserable existence. You decided to settle a personal dispute with a duel. And not just any duel, a duel without permission. In your world, honor is everything. It's the armor you wear, the currency you trade in, and the reason you get out of bed with a purpose every day. But here's the catch. Settling a quarrel with swords is illegal unless you have a green light from the Lord or King. That means, no matter how right you think you are, if you pick up a blade without permission, you're courting death. Not metaphorical death. Real, sharp, bleeding death. Let's break down exactly why this whole dueling thing is a one-way ticket to the gallows. First, the law. Medieval law is like an old dog, slow to change and a little bit cranky. Feudal lords have their own courts, their own rules, but all forbid unsanctioned duels. Why? Because dueling messes with their control. If you settle disputes on your own terms, you're basically saying, I don't need you, Lord. I can take justice into my own hands. And lords don't like that. Lords hate that. So, if you pick up your sword for a duel without official blessing, the Lord's men will hunt you down like a rabid dog. You don't get a warning. You don't get a trial like a gentleman. Nope. You get dragged in shackles, thrown before a judge, and sentenced to death. You might ask, isn't honor worth dying for? Sure. But that honor won't save your head from the chopping block. Here's a typical scenario. You've been insulted by some loudmouth in the market. Maybe he called your mother a witch or questioned your courage in front of the whole village. Your pride hurts. Your blood boils. You want satisfaction. So you call him out, sword in hand. Challenge him to a duel at dawn by the old oak tree. News spreads fast. The Lord's men hear about your plans. They don't like vigilante justice any more than you like being called a coward. On the morning of the duel, just as you're stepping forward, sword gleaming in the rising sun, 2 armored men with scowls the size of boulders show up. By order of Lord Bartholomew, one grunts. You are under arrest for illegal combat. Game over. You're hauled off to the Lord's court. The judge is a grumpy man with a nose for trouble and no patience for stubborn peasants. The court session is less trial, more formality. Everyone knows what's coming. Why did you duel without permission? The judge asks, not really interested in your explanation. You try to say something about honor, insults, your reputation. Doesn't matter. Your actions undermine the peace and order of this realm. The penalty is death by hanging. You might try to bargain, plead, even claim self-defense, but medieval justice is swift and harsh here. The next day, you find yourself at the gallows, the noose tightening around your neck. Your last thoughts are probably about that insult, or maybe the pretty girl who smiled at you once, or maybe about how much easier it would have been just to keep your mouth shut. Now, let's talk about why dueling was so strictly banned, even though everyone knew it happened anyway. You see, dueling was popular, very popular. It was how men proved themselves, but it was also chaotic. A small squabble could lead to a bloodbath, turning villages upside down and lords furious. Worse, it wasn't just peasants or knights. Even nobles who took the law into their own hands risked losing their lands and titles. Kings and dukes wanted absolute control over violence. They wanted disputes settled by their courts, not swords. The law made sure that any unauthorized fighting was seen as rebellion, a challenge to the social order itself. Imagine the consequences if dueling without permission was allowed. There'd be no peace, no safety. Every slight, every insult, every personal grievance would be answered with steel. Villages would become battlegrounds. Markets would echo with clashing swords instead of haggling voices. So the law drew a hard line. No duels without permission, no exceptions. Of course, this didn't stop secret duels entirely. Some foolish souls, drunk on rage or desperation, went ahead anyway. They met in hidden glades, under cover of night. The witnesses? Usually just the moon and a few nervous friends. But if caught, they faced the same grim fate. The hangman's noose didn't care whether you were a hot-headed youth or a seasoned knight. The law was clear and deadly. What about the duel itself? What actually happened in these secret fights? You show up with your sword, maybe a dagger hidden in your belt. Your opponent is tense, sweating, gripping their weapon with white knuckles. The air is thick with anticipation and the smell of damp earth and unwashed bodies. No crowds cheering, no grand speeches. Just two people risking everything for pride. Steel clangs, blood spills. One man falls, the other stands, victorious but doomed. Because no matter who wins, the law wins too. And if you think you can bribe your way out, think again. Lords despised dueling because it weakened their control and brought disorder. Bribes might delay your sentence, but they rarely spared your life. Besides, the cost was high. Hanging was humiliating and slow. Your body would be left to rot in public view, a warning to anyone else thinking about playing judge, jury, and executioner. So next time you're insulted in the marketplace or slighted at the tavern, remember, you could settle it with swords. But without permission, you're not a hero, you're a criminal, and the penalty is death. Honor is important, yes, but in medieval Europe, the law came first, and it did not mess around. Now take a deep breath. Relax your grip on that imaginary sword, because you just dodged a very sharp and very deadly bullet. Welcome to the harsh reality of medieval violence and justice, where pride might get you killed and rules aren't just suggestions, they're survival. You're in a tavern, and you've just made a terrible mistake. You see, medieval taverns are not the places to test your wit on a priest, especially if that priest is within earshot. And if he's within spit-throwing distance, well, you might as well start rehearsing your apologies, because your life just got a lot more complicated. You were just telling a joke, right? A funny one. Or at least you thought it was funny. Something about the priest's fashion sense, his funny little hat, his loud voice, or maybe how he always claims to hear God's secrets, while you're barely managing to hear the groans of a hangover. But jokes don't travel well in medieval Europe when they involve God's representatives, especially in a place where the church isn't just a building, it's the authority. The tavern smells like old ale and damp wood, with the faint whiff of burnt stew clinging to everything. The fire in the hearth crackles, sending lazy shadows that dance on the grimy walls. Around you, peasants, merchants, and a few grizzled soldiers nurse their drinks, their faces rough and lined, eyes wary. Someone is tuning a crude lute in the corner, creating a low hum that mixes with the murmur of conversation and occasional raucous laughter. You lean back on your creaky wooden stool, feeling a bit too confident after several cups of the local brew. Your tongue loosens, and before you know it, your words fly out, mocking the priest sitting at a table nearby. You didn't mean harm. It was just a bit of fun, a joke to lighten the heavy air of everyday misery. Except that the priest's face doesn't crease with laughter. Instead, it hardens. His eyes narrow to slits. The tavern falls a little quieter, just enough that you can hear the distant tolling of the church bell, a reminder that God is never far away. The priest stands slowly, and suddenly the room feels colder, heavier, like the weight of invisible eyes resting on your shoulders. You try to laugh it off, but the smile dies on your lips. Insulting a priest isn't just bad manners. In medieval times, it's a crime. More than that, it's an act of blasphemy, a direct challenge to the church's authority. And the church doesn't forgive lightly. You're quickly surrounded by a handful of the priest's closest supporters, local men who respect the church's power as much as they fear it. They shove you roughly to your feet, muttering about justice and punishment. No one here is interested in your side of the story. The law is clear, if not exactly kind. Insulting a cleric can land you in hot water, or worse. You might be dragged before the local lord or handed over to the ecclesiastical court. Those courts aren't known for mercy. They deal in penance, fines, or even corporal punishment, public whippings, or time in the stocks to teach you a lesson that's as much about shame as pain. But it doesn't stop there. You could be branded a heretic, an enemy of God. And heresy, in medieval Europe, is a crime that can be punished by imprisonment, torture, or death. The church's eyes are long, its reach even longer. As you're hauled away, the tavern returns to its usual noise. The ale flows again. The lute starts to sing. But you're left with a pounding head, a dry mouth, and a gnawing sense that your joke wasn't quite worth the price. The next morning, you find yourself in the cold light of the local lord's hall. The room smells faintly of wood smoke and damp stone, with flickering torches casting long shadows. The lord sits on a raised bench, flanked by his steward and a cleric whose robes look far too fine for a man who spends his days in a drafty hall like this. Your crime has been laid out plainly. You mocked the priest, and that mockery is an affront to the social order and divine will. The Lord leans forward, a stern crease between his brows. "Blasphemy is no laughing matter," he says, voice low and grave. "The church guides our souls. To insult its servants is to insult God himself." You swallow hard. You don't have much to say. Defiance would only make things worse. The Lord Steward pulls out a parchment, the accusation written in looping script, and a quill, ready for your mark or your fate. You're ordered to pay a fine, a hefty sum for a peasant or tradesman. It's not just money. It's your standing in the community, your family's honor. Some would call it extortion dressed as justice. If you can't pay, the punishment escalates. You might be whipped publicly, your back torn raw in front of your neighbors and family. The stocks await, the wooden cage that turns your shame into a spectacle. Children might throw rotten vegetables. Neighbors will whisper about your insolence for years. In rare, harsher cases, especially if you insult the priest in a way that questions church doctrine or the legitimacy of the faith, you could be imprisoned by the ecclesiastical authorities, subjected to interrogation. The tools of torture are cruel and varied, designed to make you confess sins or heresies you may not even understand. The church believes that pain cleanses the soul. There is no trial by jury, not in the way modern courts operate. Justice here is a mix of the Lord's whim, church doctrine, and community pressure. If the priest feels particularly wronged, he might demand harsher punishment, and his word carries weight. Back in the tavern, the priest's supporters retell the story with relish. "He thought he was clever," one says, shaking his head, "but the Lord's justice is swift." The priest himself returns to his duties, walking through the village with that same stiff-backed confidence, knowing his authority has been reaffirmed. He is not just a man of God, but a man of power. To challenge him is to invite ruin. For you, life moves forward, but marked by this incident. Your neighbors look at you sideways. Your wife or mother might warn you to keep your tongue in check. The priest's watchful gaze never truly leaves you. This is medieval justice in action, harsh, uneven, and deeply intertwined with faith. It's a world where words have power and where a careless joke can become a death sentence, where social order is enforced not just by laws, but by fear of divine wrath and the threat of eternal punishment. And in that world, insulting a priest is not just rude, it's dangerous. So next time you find yourself in a tavern, nursing a cup of bitter ale, remember, your words can haunt you longer than any wound. You've just decided to wear something a little nicer than you're allowed. Maybe it's a silk thread or a bit more trim on your tunic. Perhaps you've sneaked into a pair of shoes that cost more than your yearly wages, or slipped on a hat that only nobles are supposed to wear. Vanity, in medieval Europe, is not just frowned upon, it's a crime. And no, your excuse of, "I just wanted to look good," won't save you from the long arm of sumptuary law. Sumptuary laws are like an invisible cage stitched into every thread you put on your back. They dictate exactly what you can wear based on your social rank, because, apparently, the medieval world didn't want peasants confusing themselves with lords, or worse, causing a noble to feel jealous over a fancy doublet. So, here you are, dressed a little too nicely for a lowly serf, or maybe a burgher trying to act a bit more important than you really are. It's not just a fashion faux pas. It's a direct challenge to the social order, a slap in the face to centuries of hierarchy. And in a world where your place is as fixed as the sun's rising, that's dangerous. Now, you might think, who's going to notice? But in a village or town where everyone knows your business, someone always does. Maybe it's the local constable, a jealous neighbor, or even the Lord's steward. And once you're noticed, the trouble begins. You become a walking accusation, a spark ready to ignite the tinderbox of suspicion and resentment. The moment someone calls you out, you're no longer just an individual trying to look sharp. You are a criminal in the eyes of the law, and your vanity is a threat to public order. Because clothing is more than fabric. It's a visible mark of rank and obedience, the silent language of medieval society. Imagine the scene, a group of townsfolk whispering behind cupped hands. Maybe you hear the hiss of, "He's wearing velvet on a baker's wages," or, "She dared to wear a fur collar like a lady of the court." Your neighbors clutch their purses a little tighter, and the Lord's men start keeping an eye on you. The punishment? It depends on where you are and who's in charge. In some towns, you might just get a hefty fine. That's right. They'll reach into your purse, take a good chunk of your meager savings, and slap your hand with a legal warning. But fines can quickly become unbearable if you're caught multiple times. In harsher regions, it gets worse. Authorities might confiscate your expensive clothes on the spot, tearing or burning them in public as a lesson to others. Picture your beloved jacket ripped from your shoulders and tossed into flames, the smoke curling upwards like your social standing. And it's not only the authorities who punish you. Social shame is a far more brutal executioner. Word spreads like wildfire in medieval towns, and soon everyone knows about your crime against decorum. Your neighbors might refuse to trade with you, call you a liar or a fraud, or worse, accuse you of witchcraft or other immoral acts simply because you dared to look above your station. Sometimes the law turns even crueler. If the offense is serious enough, or if you're caught impersonating nobility, you could be jailed, whipped, or even face mutilation. Yes, medieval justice could be merciless. A few stitches of your tongue cut out for lying about your rank? Not unheard of. Public humiliation was a common tool to keep social order intact. Why such harshness? Because in a rigidly hierarchical society, appearances were everything. Your clothes declared your place in the grand medieval caste system. If everyone started dressing above their station, how would anyone tell the lord from the serf? How could the system keep the peasants working the fields and the nobles ruling the courts? So, the sumptuary laws were less about fashion and more about control. They enforced obedience to the natural order and reminded everyone of their place, right down to the colors and fabrics they could wear. Of course, the laws were full of loopholes and inconsistencies. Some towns allowed wealthy merchants a bit more luxury to show their success. Others tightened restrictions during times of economic hardship or political unrest. But no matter the details, breaking these laws was always a gamble with serious consequences. You try to argue your case, but I earned this cloth fair and square. But that doesn't matter. The law is not about fairness. It's about maintaining the illusion of order. The rich stay rich, the poor stay poor. And your noble jacket is a threat to that fragile balance. In court, judges would call witnesses, neighbors, servants, even family members to testify if they saw you wearing forbidden clothing. The testimony was usually enough to condemn you. Sometimes the accused would beg for mercy, swear poverty, or blame a trickster tailor. But the verdict often followed the letter of the law strictly. And so, your crime of vanity becomes a cautionary tale whispered at village firesides. Don't dress above your station, the elders warn, or you'll lose everything. If you somehow escape punishment, you're still branded. You become known as the one who dared to challenge the social order with a finer cloak or a better hat. Gossip spreads, and you might find yourself quietly excluded from community events, markets, or marriages. It's a slow, silent exile, a social death that's often worse than any physical punishment. Because in the medieval world, survival wasn't just about food or shelter, it was about belonging. So, next time you're tempted to wear something a bit too fine, remember this: medieval fashion was a law, and laws in those days were enforced with an iron fist, sometimes literally. Vanity wasn't just a sin. It was a crime, punishable by public shame, financial ruin, or worse. You might think this all sounds harsh, maybe even unfair, but in the 14th century, fairness wasn't the point. Order was. And in the grand theater of medieval life, your clothes were your script. Step out of line, and the audience and the executioner are waiting. Now, if you manage to survive this fashion police without losing your head or your shirt, consider yourself lucky. Because in medieval Europe, dressing above your station was a gamble that most lost. And that, dear listener, is the slow, heavy truth about what happens when vanity turns criminal under the watchful eyes of sumptuary law. Now, you've just woken up in a plague quarantine zone. The good news is you're alive. The bad news? You're trapped. Not in some cozy castle tower or comfy room with a warm fire. No, you're stuck behind a wall, surrounded by signs, guards, and neighbors who look as sick as a bag of rotten apples. And just beyond that wall lies freedom, or something like it. But freedom comes with a price, and it starts with a crime. You eye the thick wooden gates that keep you penned in like livestock. You know they're there for a reason. The plague doesn't pick and choose, but the law sure does. Breaking quarantine is not just frowned upon. It's punishable by death. Maybe not by a kindly sheriff, but by executioners wielding axes or ropes, and sometimes by angry villagers wielding pitchforks. The penalty is severe because the stakes are so high. One desperate escapee could infect an entire village, turning neighbors into corpses faster than you can blink. But desperation is a stubborn thing. The stench of death and sickness clings to every corner of your confinement. The air is thick with the coughs and groans of your fellow prisoners. You've run out of food, clean water, and hope. And so, you begin to plot your escape. First, you climb. The wall is rough and uneven, covered in creeping ivy and crumbling mortar. Your hands scrape against the stone, skin tearing and bleeding, but you don't care. Freedom tastes sweeter than the pain. You pull yourself up, careful to avoid the watchful eyes of the guards who pace like hungry wolves. Their armor clinks softly, a constant reminder that you're being watched, judged, waiting for a reason to strike. Below, the courtyard is empty, for now. You drop down with a soft grunt and creep toward the gate. The heavy wooden doors are barred from the outside. No chance of opening them from within without a tool. But maybe, just maybe, the lock is old, rusted, forgotten in this plague-ridden nightmare. You find a loose nail on the ground. A small, rusty thing, barely more than a toothpick. It might not be much, but it's all you have. You kneel down and work the nail into the lock, twisting slowly, heart pounding louder than the church bell that tolls in the distance. Time feels endless. Every second is a test of your nerves and skill. Then, click. The lock gives way with a creak that sounds far too loud in the stillness. You freeze, waiting for an alarm that never comes. Maybe luck is finally on your side. The gate swings open a crack. You peek out. The street beyond is empty, but the smell hits you first. Rot, decay, and something more sour. The unmistakable odor of death and plague. You slip through the gap, footsteps soft against the cobblestones. Your heart hammers in your chest as you move away from the wall, away from the quarantine zone that has held you captive. Each step feels like stealing life itself. But escaping quarantine is more than just leaving a place. It's breaking the law. It's defying the king, the local lord, the church, and every sick soul trapped behind you. It's an act of rebellion punishable by the harshest means. If you're caught, there's no mercy, no hearing, no chance to explain that you fled because you feared death inside more than outside. You'll be dragged back in chains, paraded before a judge who has already made up their mind and sentenced to die, either by hanging, burning, or a swift beheading. Your execution serves as a warning, a grim reminder to those left behind. The guards don't just represent authority, they represent the fragile hope of survival. Letting someone out too soon could ignite a fire of infection that spreads like wildfire. For medieval communities, plague was not just a disease. It was a nightmare, a judgment from God, and the greatest threat to life and order. So, you move quickly, hiding in shadows, avoiding patrols. But the streets outside the quarantine zone aren't safe either. Villagers are scared, angry, and desperate themselves. Anyone who spots you might turn you in for a reward. Or, worse, lynch you on the spot, blaming you for bringing death to their doorstep. You duck behind a cart piled high with rotting vegetables and hold your breath. Footsteps echo nearby. Too close for comfort. You wait until the sound fades before moving again. Each step is a gamble. Each breath you take might be your last. The law doesn't just punish you for breaking quarantine. It punishes everyone who helps you. If a neighbor gives you food or shelter, they're risking their own life. Helping a fugitive from plague quarantine is a crime as serious as murder. And the punishments are just as severe. In a time when survival was a daily struggle, communities relied on strict rules to prevent chaos. Quarantine laws might seem cruel now, but back then, they were the thin line between life and death. The infected were cut off, left alone to die or recover, while the healthy tried to carry on. You might wonder what it's like to be caught. Imagine being dragged from the shadows, hooded and shackled, forced back into the quarantine zone where friends have already died, where hope is a fading ember. Your punishment is swift and merciless. Sometimes you're publicly humiliated first, displayed as an example to others foolish enough to try the same. In some places, you might be branded with a hot iron, marked forever as a lawbreaker. Other times, the executioner's blade finds your neck before the crowd has even gathered. Death for breaking quarantine is not a rare event. It's a grim certainty. And yet, despite the risks, people still tried to escape. Because the plague zone wasn't just a prison, it was a tomb, and death, slow or fast, was a gamble no one wanted to make. So, as you flee down the street, heart racing, lungs burning, you're not just breaking a law, you're breaking a fragile peace between life and death. Your crime is desperation made flesh, a silent scream against a world that offers no mercy. Behind you, the gates slam shut with a finality that echoes in your bones. The guards shout, horns blare, and the hunt begins. You might run, you might hide. But in the medieval mind, plague and crime are intertwined. Escape is not freedom, it's damnation. You're sitting in the smoky corner of the tavern, surrounded by the usual crowd, drunken peasants, a grizzled soldier muttering about his lost pay, and the town gossip who never misses a chance to listen in. The fire crackles, sending smoke spirals into the low ceiling, and the wooden floorboards groan under the weight of spilled ale and weary boots. The night feels like any other, except you're a bit looser with your tongue than usual, perhaps a little more reckless after one too many mugs. And then you say it. His Majesty? Unfit to rule. Just a few words, tossed out like an old crust of bread. Maybe you were talking about the latest tax, or the war dragging on too long, or the king's new law that none of you understand, but all of you hate. Maybe you said it in jest. Maybe you thought no one heard. But someone did. There's always someone who hears these things. Someone whose ears are sharper than their conscience. Someone who owes loyalty to the crown, more than friendship to you. Maybe it's the tavern owner who's been paid off to keep his ears open. Maybe it's a nosy noble's spy. Or worse, a fellow patron who decides that your careless words are worth gold or favor. Within hours, your name is whispered in dark corridors. By dawn, you are summoned, not by friendly neighbors, but by the king's men with cold steel on their belts and colder eyes. The crime? Treason. The word hangs in the air heavier than the morning fog. Treason. Not a petty theft, not a drunken brawl, not even murder. Treason. The ultimate betrayal. To question the king's right to rule is to question the divine order itself. And the divine has a very unforgiving sense of humor. You don't get a trial by jury. Justice in this matter is swift and brutal. The king's court convenes in the Great Hall, a stone fortress with stained tapestries depicting victories and saints who do nothing but watch. Your accuser is there, shadowed behind velvet curtains, ready to deliver their damning testimony. Your crime is simple. You voiced doubt. You dared to speak ill of your sovereign. In the eyes of the law, that's an attack on the realm, a threat to peace and order. The punishment? Death. The method? The scaffold awaits. But let's back up a bit, because the process is a chilling dance of ritual and fear. First, the interrogation. The king's men don't waste time with niceties. You're dragged before the magistrate, a grim man with a face carved from stone, and asked to confess. You might be tempted to say no, to insist on your innocence. But remember, this isn't about truth. It's about control. If you deny, they press harder. Torture is always nearby, a whisper in the stone walls promising swift persuasion if you fail to comply. Even if you confess, the sentence is the same. Mercy is a stranger here. Treason demands a public spectacle to remind everyone else. Speak against the king, and this will be your fate. The scaffold, a grim wooden platform built in the town square, is your final stage. It's a place of terror, but also of dark ceremony. The crowd gathers, curious, frightened, eager to witness the consequences of disloyalty. The executioner, masked and silent, stands ready with rope or axe, depending on your crime's severity and your social rank. You'll be forced to wear a collar of iron or chains. Your hands may be bound, your head shaved, symbols stripping you of dignity and identity. You stand exposed, vulnerable to the cold wind and the judgmental eyes of your neighbors. And then, the sentence is pronounced in a voice loud enough for all to hear. For speaking against His Majesty, the King, you are guilty of treason. May God have mercy on your soul. There's no mercy. The drop comes quick, or the axe falls hard. Your life ended because your words were sharper than a sword. But the consequences don't stop at death. Your family is disgraced, your property seized, your name erased from records, forgotten, except as a warning. In a society where honor is everything, this is a fate worse than death. Now, let's think about why this all matters. In a world where the king is believed to rule by divine right, loyalty is not just expected, it's demanded. Questioning the king is questioning God's will. That's why the law is so unforgiving. It's not just politics, it's theology. And medieval kings aren't just politicians. They're sacred figures whose authority is absolute. This means your words have weight. A careless phrase, a drunken remark, a whispered doubt. All are potential weapons or poisons. In a time when power is fragile and rumors can spark rebellions, the crown treats treason like an infection that must be cut out before it spreads. And so, your tavern joke or quiet grumble becomes a death sentence. The law makes examples of those who falter to keep others in line. Fear is the king's shield. So what about the trial? Well, it's less a trial and more a public affirmation of guilt. Evidence is often hearsay. Witnesses may be coerced. Confessions are sometimes tortured from you, either physically or psychologically. Justice is a formality. The outcome is written before you enter the hall. You'll see nobles and clergy nod in approval. They benefit from the king's power and are keen to protect it. Your peers will whisper about your fate in hushed tones. Some might feel relief that the dangerous talk is silenced. Others may secretly wonder if their own careless words might lead them here. For you, there is no second chance. Your fate is sealed the moment your words cross the wrong ears. And the scaffold? It's not just a place of death. It's a tool of control. A grim reminder to all who gather that loyalty is life and dissent is death. So next time you're tempted to grumble over wine, remember this. In medieval Europe, your words carry the weight of swords. The king's power is not just political. It is a deadly force that punishes thought as much as action. You have said the king is unfit to rule, and now you will pay the price. Now, you've decided to fake it till you make it. Not just fake it, full on, polished, powdered face, borrowed crest, look at me, I'm a lord, level pretending, because why not? Nobles get the best food, the softest beds, and they don't have to pick lice out of their beards every morning. Plus, they get to carry swords and bark orders without anyone daring to laugh at them. You get peasants' rags and a mouthful of tooth rot. So you swipe a crest from some careless noble's banner. Practice your fancy words and polish your act until even the village priest starts nodding like you belong. It's not exactly subtle, but hey, it works, at least for a while. A few folks buy it, and you get invited to the local lord's feast, where you gorge yourself on meats that still have the smell of the field and cheese that doesn't try to crawl off your plate. You sit tall, drink from the silver goblet, and smile like you own the place. For a day or two, you're the king of the hill. Then it happens. Someone who knows real nobility squints at your borrowed crest. A whispered question here, a suspicious glance there. Suddenly, the entire village is buzzing like a hive disturbed. Who is that knave, parading around in stolen colors? Someone mutters. That's not Lord Geoffrey's signet, no, says another, narrowing their eyes. The word spreads faster than plague rats in winter. Imposter. Now you're not just a rogue, you're a criminal. And this crime is no laughing matter. You are accused of impersonating nobility. It's a charge that carries consequences darker than the cell you'll soon share with rats. Because in the rigid ironclad world of medieval hierarchy, claiming to be what you are not is a threat to the whole order. Nobles were born to rule, and their authority was seen as God's will. So if you pretend to be one, you're not just lying, you're blaspheming. The first sign your luck is running out comes in the form of a knock at dawn. Loud, Harsh. No nonsense. The local bailiff and 2 armed men stand at your door, grim-faced and ready. You are under arrest for false pretenses. The bailiff grunts. You try to protest, but your voice sounds weak, like a sick dog's whimper. There's no one to save you. Not the lord whose name you stole, nor the serfs who admired your swagger yesterday. You are hauled off to the village jail, a dank, dark hole beneath the courthouse, smelling of mold and broken promises. The walls drip with water, and somewhere nearby, rats feast on yesterday's leftovers. Your hands are bound, your borrowed finery ripped away, leaving you shivering in threadbare clothes. The echoes of your footsteps are swallowed by the silence. Next comes the trial. And make no mistake, it's less courtroom drama and more public humiliation ritual. There's no defense lawyer to argue your case, no jury to weigh the facts, just a judge, usually a local lord or a steward, who already knows the verdict. You stand before a crowd, the whispering village watching as your fate is sealed. The charges are read aloud. For falsely assuming the rank and arms of nobility, to deceive and corrupt the order of the realm. It sounds official, but it's just a long way of saying you dared to wear a badge that wasn't yours. The punishment for such an offense is brutal. Medieval justice didn't do minor infractions lightly. You might expect a fine, a slap on the wrist, maybe a stint in the stocks. But no, impersonating nobility was a crime against the social order and the divine right of kings. You are marked a false lord, a blasphemer, and a danger to the peace. The sentence varies by region, but here's the reality. You will be publicly branded, mutilated, or worse. In some places, your right hand, the one that dared hold the sword of a noble, is cut off, a permanent reminder of your treachery. In others, your face is burned with a hot iron, leaving scars visible for life, a warning to others who think they can play the Lord's role. Sometimes you are flogged in the town square until your back is raw and bleeding, all while the villagers shout insults or throw rotten vegetables. The point is clear. You will carry the mark of your crime forever. Nobody will ever trust you again. Nobles won't see you as one of their own, and peasants won't look at you as anything other than a cautionary tale. In rarer, darker cases, the punishment escalates to death. The logic is brutal but simple. A false noble could rally others, sow discord, and threaten the fragile hierarchy. Better to remove the threat entirely. Hanging, beheading, or even burning at the stake were not unheard of. And because the medieval world did not believe in second chances for social rebels, your family might suffer as well, losing land, titles, or rights simply because you dared to wear their colors. So, what happens to you after the sentence is passed? If you survive the branding or the maiming, you're released back into a world that no longer offers kindness. You become a marked man, or worse, a marked nobody. The crest you stole lies in ashes or scraps. Your voice is stripped of polish, and the noble's life you once flaunted becomes a memory you can't share. You might try to disappear, change your name, flee to another village. But in a world ruled by rumors and reputation, your past is never far behind. The tale of the false lord will spread like wildfire, told around hearths to remind peasants why they must stay in their place. And here's the cruelest truth of all. Pretending to be noble never just meant dressing the part or borrowing a fancy crest. It meant risking everything on a lie that could kill you. Because in medieval times, social order was not just about respect. It was about survival. Your place in society was a chain, and if you tried to break it, you risked shattering bones instead. So maybe next time, you'll think twice before stealing a crest or slipping on a velvet cloak that doesn't belong to you. Because the world you're trying to fool is cold, cruel, and merciless, and it has no patience for pretenders. Now, you've just decided to say no to a noble. Maybe it was a favor, maybe a request for a horse, maybe something more delicate like a daughter's hand in marriage. Whatever it was, you said no. In the medieval world, this isn't just a word. It's a statement of defiance. A clear message that you don't understand your place in the grand feudal order. Because no matter how polite you tried to be, no matter how gently you explained why you couldn't or wouldn't, the noble heard disobedience. Worse, insubordination. And if you think the medieval world will shrug that off, well, congratulations. You've just volunteered for a fast trip to the executioner's block. You see, medieval society was built on one simple rule. Obey the people above you. Lords, dukes, counts, knights, they all had power because they had power over you. And that meant your no was never really your own. It was more like a polite suggestion with a dagger hidden behind it. Refusing a noble was the quickest way to find yourself branded a criminal. Not just any criminal, a threat to the social order. And in a world where your rank was your life, crossing the wrong person was like lighting a fuse on your own funeral pyre. Now, let's talk about what happens next. Because just saying no isn't the end of the story. It's the start of a very bad day. First, there's the noble's reaction. Don't expect tears or a thoughtful conversation. Expect a slow, cold stare. Maybe a twisted smile that says, "You just made a mistake." Sometimes it's a verbal warning. "You will regret this," they say. And that's not a threat. It's a promise. Other times, the noble skips the pleasantries and moves straight to punishment. And in medieval times, punishment was a bloody, brutal affair. The most common charge thrown at you for refusal, trebly worse than simple defiance, rebellion, or disobedience. Those words mattered, because in the eyes of the law, disobedience to a noble was treason. And treason was the crime medieval kings and lords hated most, because it threatened the entire fragile pyramid of power. If you could say no once, who else might say no? If one peasant, one merchant, one minor lord dared to refuse, what happened to the rest? Chaos. So the law made examples out of offenders. Public, painful, unforgettable examples. Executioners sharpened their axes, priests prepared last rites, and the whole village gathered to watch the show. Your refusal was no longer a private act. It was a public spectacle. There was no trial, as we think of it today, no jury of your peers. Usually, a quick verdict from the Lord or his appointed judge. And the sentence? Hanging, beheading, quartering. Sometimes all at once if the Lord was feeling particularly vindictive. And why so harsh? Because power needed to be shown. Loudly, visibly. So the next poor soul thinking about saying no would remember what happened to you. But refusal wasn't always about the big stuff. Sometimes it was as simple as denying a noble's demand for food, shelter, or labor. Refusing to lend your horse or cart. Crime. Saying no to working on the Lord's land during harvest. Crime. even ignoring a noble's request to host a feast or provide servants? Crime. All these small refusals chipped away at the Lord's authority, and that could never be tolerated. What about the rare few brave or foolish enough to argue back, to stand their ground with words or fists? You can imagine how that ended. A noble's word was law. Defiance was met with force, and those who resisted were not just executed. They were made examples of in the cruelest ways possible. Public whipping, mutilation, imprisonment in filthy dungeons, all common punishments for insolence. And if you thought you might escape by fleeing, think again. Medieval society was a cage with no bars. The local lord's men were always watching. Run away, and you became a fugitive, a criminal by definition. Bounty hunters, guards, even peasants were encouraged to hunt you down. And if caught, torture was often used to extract information or confessions. Sometimes nobles made you watch friends or family punished in your stead. Psychological torture had a long history too. What about pleading mercy, begging for forgiveness? Sometimes that helped, if the noble was feeling merciful, or if you had valuable connections, you might be spared the worst. But mercy was a luxury few enjoyed, and nobles were not known for their kindness when their pride was wounded. So, refusing a noble's request was not a question of simple disagreement. It was a declaration of war, a gamble with your life that rarely paid off. Most people learned early to say yes, even when it meant misery, humiliation, or harm, because survival often depended on obedience. And those who dared say no, their names often disappeared from history, buried under the shadow of their fate. Here's a taste of what a day could look like after you say no. You're called before the Lord's court. A small crowd gathers. The Lord sits high on his wooden bench, draped in furs and jewels, a living reminder of your place. You stand there, silent or trying to speak, but your words fall flat. No one listens to a peasant's excuse. The verdict is swift. Guilty of disobedience, sentenced to death. The executioner prepares. The crowd watches. Some weep, others cheer. The message is clear. No one refuses the Lord and lives. The sound of the axe falling is the final punctuation to your story, a grim reminder that in medieval Europe, your word was never truly your own. It belonged to those above you, and crossing them was a deadly mistake. If you thought this was just harsh law, think again. It was also about power, control, and fear. The medieval noble didn't just want obedience. They needed it to keep their castles standing and their peasants working. And saying no was the single greatest threat to that fragile balance. Thanks for listening. If you're already asleep, great. We've successfully lulled you to sleep. And if you're still awake, well, that's impressive. If you genuinely enjoy these boring stories about history, feel free to subscribe to our channel whenever you're in the mood. Sleep well, and good night.